This is the Drummers Only podcast, brought to you by the UK's leading drum store.
Hello everybody, Drummers Only Radio, episode number 62, and we are here with the wonderful Alex Reeves. Good evening, Alex, how are you?
How are you all?
Great, thank you for asking. If you're new to Alex, he has quite the CV, ranging from Elbow, Dizzee Rascal, Garvey, Razorlight, Shania Twain, Marina, Bat for Lashes, Pete Tong, Duke Dumont, the BBC Symphony Orchestra, Anna Calvi, Jaguar Cars, some film scores, and iDrum magazine. It's quite the CV, man. Quite the CV. Alex also plays soda drums, Aquarian heads, and basically anything, I guess, that makes whatever he's doing sound better. So, thank you so much, man, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
So, I saw you. I first was introduced to your playing, I think, twice in the 1 week. I saw Elbow playing on Graham Norton, and I also saw, it was round about the time, not long after we had properly started stocking Snare Drums again, and I saw the Drums in a Room project.
Yeah.
Which, if you haven't seen out there, dear internet, please go watch. But I was actually going to ask Alex to talk about it because it's quite a remarkable little document on both the vintage series drums and recording drums in a room. So yeah, man, just if you don't mind, talk us through that because it was really, really hip.
Yeah, well, I was working with a producer, Tommaso Caliva. He was using my studio for a little bit actually. He's the chief engineer with Muse. He does the records. He kind of co-produces their stuff. He set up all their home studios. He's an amazing musician and engineer. Incredible ears, will make anything sound good. And I started working on him with him on this project for Red Bull, which was basically, what do they call it? 30 drum sounds around the world. So anyway, it was like a hip hop thing. So you know the Red Bull vibe. They were like some kind of dance competition thing. They were doing like trick stuff, like because they would sponsor all sorts of stuff like skateboarding stuff and like really hip, like teenage sport vibes. And what we needed to do was play music that sounded like it had been sampled from all the decades. So we went into a studio. The music had been written, so we were just playing the drum parts to it. But we went into one studio and we had to make things sound like they were recorded over about 4 or 5 decades.
Okay.
And it was really tough because we were like, Tommaso's an amazing engineer. He did all the things he needed to do to make it sound authentic, right mics, right desk, like all the other stuff, the way he mixed it and all that kind of thing. But we were totally limited by the fact that we were in one single room. You had to make the room sound artificial. We had to put like types of convolution reverbs over the whole mix of the kit. And so he had this great idea that we would the room was so dominant in this whole thing. What would it be like if we played the same beat but in completely different rooms? So we picked 3 or 4 songs and then went to Rack Studios, went to Air, at Snap Studios, which is Funky Junk's place around the corner from here at Finsbury Park. And then we used we used a living room. We used a smaller studio that was being used for jam tracks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, one of those. And then we filmed it all and recorded it all. 3 or 4? A few years ago now. Sorry, I can't quite. 4 different songs, same kit, same drummer, and we had the mics were exactly the same. We didn't use their desks. We didn't use the studio desks. We just used the room and recorded every single thing. And the difference between the tracks, the whole sound of the track, just from the drum sound with each thing, just recorded in different places, was unbelievable. It just completely changed everything about the character of the song. With everything being exactly the same apart from the room.
Yeah, whenever anybody talks to me about going to record and whatever studio they're going into, I kind of try and point them in the direction of that project because it really does highlight that this sort of unspoken instrument almost, the room.
Yeah, it's totally true. It's quite a few people really recognize this. Like all the elbow records that I've done have some of it, only some of them anyway, have been recorded at Real World Studios, Peter Gabriel's place in West Country. And that just has a vibe. It just has a certain sound, has a certain feeling about it. And then whenever we've gone somewhere else to do stuff, like we do stuff at Blueprint in Manchester, completely different vibe. Just a different, no better, no worse, just different and wonderful. I know that Tom Waits does a thing, or maybe he used to, where he'd go to record an album, he'd go and audition a room. So he'd have a mobile recording setup, and he'd go and find whatever he finds, probably some grotty old factory, bricks everywhere that he could hit, and like bits of metal and all that kind of stuff, and set up his kind of mobile studio and then record the whole album in that, capturing the room as like you said, the kind of other character in the setup.
It's amazing. There's a good customer of ours, and a guy called Ross Mcfarland, who's been on the scene for ages. He's played for Texas and the Proclaimers and all that, and he told this really great story of recording with John Fratelli from the Fratellis. I think they went to LA, and he was like, he was so excited because he was going to go to this big, beautiful room and all this thing. And the next day, he's in a shoebox in some like back alley studio thing, and he's like, this is it. And he's like, naturally, it sounded absolutely incredible. Like, he heard it back and he was like, okay, absolutely get it, But he was expecting the LA scene thing, and it's just in this guy's dingy basement somewhere. But it made magic, Yeah.
There's a load of studios like that in London. There's what's that one that Jack White does all this stuff at? The one that's all analog. Can't remember, the Tile House.
Right.
Anyway, it's that, it's got a certain vibe about it. It's out in the middle of an industrial estate. It's got like, tile walls. Mm-hmm. It's got no gear beyond 1960, no computer. Track. If you want a click track, you got to play the click track. Brilliant. Like original. Yeah. On one of the tape reels, and play along with that. Vibe, just a different vibe, a different process as well.
Yeah, sounds it. So afterwards, did that inform how you select gear and how you select mics and all that thing going forward with the way you record?
Do you mean this Drums in the Room project?
Yeah. Did that change how you think about all that stuff now?
No, it changed how I don't think it changed much. I think we were out to prove a point, because we're recording in all those studios anyway. And it always is one of the most interesting things with drums specifically. There's other instruments will use the room a little bit, but drums, there's nothing like drums to move air. You put a guitar amp in a room and it moves air. You put a drum kit in a room and it really does make a lot of noise. And that every single instrument that you play, the kind of amalgam of what you do, sounds different in that room. Floor tom sound a certain way, bass drum sounds a certain, snare drum sounds a certain, get the cymbals in a certain way. And you find, like a gig, especially where you've got your ears out, you're not got in-ears in, you're really playing to the room or the vibe. You change how you play according to the sound of the room and according to the music and everything. It's such a complex thing.
I mean, that thing of playing the room's forgotten these days, I think.
I mean, I totally understand why. The technology is incredible. Like that little Yamaha, is it the
EAD?
You got on a drum kit and it just like makes a drum kit for you. It's like, I mean, there you go. Virtual reality, AI on drums like that. The Moises app, where you can like put a track in and it'll separate all of the component parts and then export it for you. So you've got solo drums, you've got soloed vocal. It's incredible.
It's pretty scary.
It's pretty amazing. But yes, I totally get why people don't play the room as much as they did. But then you go to the little clubs and stuff, and people still are.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I see it from, because I work in here, I see it from things like they don't tune the room. So they'll take the drum kit into a club or a cavern and it'll still be the same drum kit. It's not tweaked. They've not done anything to it, and yet they can't understand why it sounds really bonkersly different.
Yeah.
Like, why is this tiny room making my floor tom sound horrible? It's like, well, because the sound's got, it's all the reflections coming back. It's got nowhere to go.
There's some great sounding rooms and there's some terrible sounding rooms.
Yeah, but I think as a project, you really did achieve your point, you know. And
We are pleased to hear it. Yeah, do check that out, listeners. It was a really interesting process. It took a few days to get it. I think in the video, what we've done to exaggerate the kind of point of it is the Neumann heads, and like 10 feet in front of the drum kit, and use that as to kind of isolate the drums and to show exactly how much the room is affecting it. But then there's a whole mix of stuff when we released. In fact, you just have to check the Sound on Sound Art on the Sound website, which is who we did it for, the magazine. And that's, I think they still have all the multi-tracks and all the stems from.
Oh wow! Also, the Sound on Sound video is longer than the one that's on the Sonar site. It's about twice as long. The Sonar one's only about 4 minutes, but the Sound on Sound one's about 8.5 or so.
Yeah.
So you really get into the nitty gritty of it, which is just an amazing idea. With that in mind, I was watching some stuff earlier about the Young Punx stuff you did with the Stuart Copeland thing.
Oh yeah, oh man, that's nuts. That was.
It was really bonkers, man. How did that even come around?
Someone else's wild imagination.
So for those that don't know, Alex did a project with the guy Hal Helston from Young Punx, recreating Stuart Copeland's drum sound from the first two Police records, insofar as they could, almost like the same sticks and all sorts.
Where everything was the same as much as we could. We did lots of research in this. We were looking up articles from his old drum tech. Can't remember his name, but and he was talking about. We were flying emails around on how to prepare for this, and I was preparing the play-in, trying to play like, and I know his playing, I can hear his playing, but there's another thing with taking a personality and trying to reproduce the personality. He's such a presence in those records, and as a person, everything about him is a presence. Such a wonderful, inspiring kind of sound. And so I was working on that, and then I kept getting emails like, well, how are we going to get the snare sound? I was like, yeah, how are we going to get this snare sound? So we looked up the snare he was using, but that's not enough. You could tune a snare 1,000 different ways, and you can hit it in 50 different ways. So we were doing all this research, and then Hal Ritson, who was kind of putting it all together, found this article, and the drum tech said, what you do is you tune everything as high as you can possibly tune it, and then rim shot it as hard as you possibly can. But yeah, so we found the cymbals. We bought. I've got his knocking around somewhere. I've got those pasty, those 12-inch hats that he was using, super thick, like really, really high up. Again, snare drums super high. We took a lot of octobans.
Yeah.
I will ever have them.
It's like as well. People don't realise that he had a different hoop on the top of the drum as he did to the bottom and all that from back then. There was like a
top and then is that right? I can't.
Yeah, die cast on top and a triple flange on the bottom.
Yeah, so it makes the drum move in a different way, doesn't it?
Yeah, you just get the impression he bought a janky Black Beauty from a store somewhere and threw it up.
Yeah, Also, then Hal got a hold of the multi-tracks for some of their Police records. Don't stand so close to me, mate. Oh, it was something. No, I can think of the beat, but I can't think of the song. Anyway, he was like, there are completely two different drum takes, two different drum kits. You just didn't hear it on the record at all. It was like, occasionally you hear a cymbal like popping out from somewhere, and you think he's just, played those and all that, and these little punctuation things that he does live. But no, it was two different kind of meshed together. And he said they weren't even in time with each other, really. They were like, but when the record was mixed and put out, it's so vibey and perfect. So we were doing like two drum takes. He was like, don't play it so in time.
I think that's the thing as well, that folk forget about the context of those records, because they had enough tape to do like maybe 2 passes.
Yeah.
And he was like, if Sting had his way, none of that shit would have been on any of those records. He just didn't have time to fight with me. So like all those splash cymbals in the middle of the verse, that would have never flown if we didn't have his little tape.
I think I remember reading an interview with an old rhythm magazine interview with Vinnie Colaiuta. And the guy who was doing the interview, Martin Poynton, who was like the deputy editor at the time or something like that, had gone to Sting's house, his gaff, and he was like, witnessing this rehearsal that was going on between in the Sting band. Obviously, it's like, world superstars at that time, like mid 90s or whatever it was. Around to Vinnie Colaiuta. Vinnie Colaiuta, one of the greatest, and goes, "Can you stop doing that fucking foldy roll, fucking baroque shit?" Foldy roll baroque. Vinnie Colaiuta to stop overplaying with the splash cymbals.
I mean, how to reduce them to like foldy roll baroque shit? That's getting kept. Belongs on a t-shirt, I think.
There you go. It was only stop.
Yeah.
That.
So, like, did you have to play trad grip and all that nonsense?
I mean, it was like it was to just create the vibe as much, because it wasn't going to be a Stuart Copeland thing. It was just like, he really loved Stuart Copeland. He really loved, especially the older Police records, and he just wanted to make something that like had lent the vibe to that. It happens a lot, like things bounce off a certain idea, a sample that you found. That happens in hip hop all the time. Someone finds a like a drum loop and they bounce off it, and then they have to get permission to use the drum loop, which they obviously have to pay a load of money for, or for copyright, whatever. And then they have to relinquish some of their kind of songwriting royalties to that for the use of that drum loop. Well, it was what we were doing was essentially making those kind of sounds and feels in the spirit of, and then he was writing music over the top of it for the Young Punx.
That's pretty cool. Yeah,
so I think it's an interesting approach, and it skirts around the idea of copyright and the thought of content without actually kind of causing any problems, because all you're doing is capturing a vibe.
Yeah. So in my research of the work you've done, going through the artists you've played with, and it became very apparent that every single artist that you have has a really unique voice. They all have their own voice, and there's nothing samey in your catalogue, How do you, as a sort of studio guy, accommodate that voice?
Do you mean their voice, or
yeah, like their compositional voice, not their actual singing voice, but like, Guy Garvey's different from Elbow, who's different from Anna Calvi, who's different from.
Yeah, absolutely. How? I don't know. I think it's, you come to an agreement. It's like groove. I think there was a Steve Gadd quote a little, like, you all come to an agreement. And once everyone agrees, then you've got what that groove is. And I mean, I'll always come up with something just weird or off the wall or a bit unusual. Sounds, I love sounds. I love messing around with them. And often you'll be like, oh, I've been inspired by this recently, and you'll play a thing or do a thing, and they'll be like, oh, I'd like that. Can I have that? And that'll be incorporated in somehow, and then it'll be twisted and moved and made into something different. And the artistic process is long and interesting. But sometimes, in the studio specifically, sometimes you're asked to do a specific thing. You've got to just be able to do that as well. Because it is different for every single person. Having a conversation, you don't just shout over the top of it. You don't. If you're having a conversation that you enjoy, that you like, you look at someone in the eye and you listen to what they're saying and you're reacting to what they're saying, and then you say a thing that's relevant, and then they say a thing that's relevant, and it's kind of the same with music, or the creative process of music. It's a conversation, and like I said, you kind of end up coming to an agreement of some kind. Although if it's an artist, then they go.
Yeah, I mean, because one of the questions I have is it's not necessarily loaded, but on the topic of it, as an artist and you're there to do a job, how do you handle it if you think the situation or the request they want isn't suitable, like musically?
That's not for you to say.
Right. Do you just bin it and just get on with it?
Well, do you know what often it is that you just haven't got to the bottom of it. So if someone says something that's so off the wall or so weird that you think, well, that's never going to work, often that's where the magic happens. And if you're working with those people, and especially if people have already done it and you kind of trust them already, like I started working with Natasha from Back for Lashes, and I'd listen to her stuff and I was like, I knew that she knew what she was talking about. And then I worked on a record with her, and it was just this like staying in a house in the Catskills National Park in upstate New York, and she was just like, just try some stuff. It was a lot of that. Like, oh, I like that. Oh, can you try this? And but being quite vague in her descriptions, but I kind of knew what that she had a direction and she wanted to find a place where this record was right for her vision and her artistic voice. What she wanted was in her head, but possibly not describable. And I've got to say, in a studio, people an artist is often after a feeling, and they're chasing a feeling, and they're relying on you to kind of fulfill that. I want to feel like this when I listen to this song. That's it. And you've got to get, and as a session player, as a musician, you've kind of got to get to the bottom of that and find out what it is. It's up. I do think it's up. The prerogative is on the musician to try and understand it and not to doubt them. And eventually you'll get to the point and you might think it's shit. And then you hear the record and it's like, this is amazing. Why doubt this? Yeah. I've had with working with Guy. I thought, I don't get it. And then you get to the end of it and you're like, genuflect to the master. Yeah. A lot of that.
What's the creative process for Elbow like?
It's pretty special. It's long, and they, getting the band together is tricky. But once everyone's together and I'm in there, it's a lot of fun. Because they were when I kind of joined them in 2016. They'd done most of the record. That was the Little Fictions record. They'd written much all of it, and they got like Craig Potter, who produces it. Had got all the stuff together. He'd got all the drum loops. He'd found little things. He'd programmed loads of stuff. And then when they got me in, it was like towards kind of last quarter of the album to recreate what they did or to add some ideas or whatever. But then the next record we for Giants of All Sizes, we went on a writing trip to Hamburg to this lovely studio called Clouds Hill, we were there for about 10 days and we just set up all the stuff and just started playing. A lot of it was from jam sessions, and they were like, well, we haven't done this for a while. This is really fun. Let's get some music out of this. Mm-hmm. A lot of it also, everyone's got their studio. So people will send ideas. Like right now I've been sending drum ideas to them. It's occasional ideas come back for the next record, it doesn't have to be released for ages. So we've got a little bit of time to kind of settle into it and make something that's just so. But as a creative process, it's I've seen it and it's different every single time.
That's pretty rad because I've liked them for a long time, and what I like about them is that it feels like every record they make is something different. Yeah. And they're one of the few bands now that can get away with that, like Radiohead or something, where they can just kind of disappear into their own little world and it'll still uniquely be Elbow.
Yeah, it's really interesting the way that things come together as well. Like for instance, on on Little Fictions, we did a song called White Heat, mm-hmm. And it ended up with this pretty strong, like kind of groove, like hitting the toms really hard. But I did probably 5 different versions of that song on drums. The song remained pretty much constant throughout. It didn't really change, but the drums kept changing. It wasn't right. We tried this, we tried that. And if you were to like listen to all the versions of that song that had been tried out, you wouldn't recognize the sound of it until the released version, because it was so different. It really was. But the song itself remained the same. The vocals and the little da 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 little line that was in there remained the same. The drum beat completely changed each time.
It's pretty fascinating, man. It's pretty great, and I think you've kind of managed to they've always had some pretty hip grooves throughout their back catalogue. You listen to Scattered Black and Whites, or I always get the name of I can never remember the name of the song. It's the last song, or the penultimate song off the second record. But you've now added to that canon as well. Magnificent, She Says, Weightless. These grooves are like very elbow grooves. That's pretty cool.
So Little Fictions was like a kind of vaguely programmed like funk beat that Craig had come up with. Did you say Little Fictions or did you say Magnificent? Sorry.
Well, both of them. Because I was talking about Little Fictions because it's like this really weird syncopated percussion thing that's going on in the background behind like the Billie Jean groove.
Yeah, that was really fun. In fact, that's the first one where they were like, "Have you got anything?" We did that. We had the first half of that tune, dun dun ga boom boom boom, which originally was all pro. In fact, I don't think I played a couple of bits on that, but I didn't play the drum beat on that. That was a loop that Craig found, and then at the end, the play out bit of Little Fictions, the kind of the second part of it. I was like, can I try some stuff over this? Because you've got a lovely little loop here, and we found a little thing. And Guy was in the booth with me in Blueprint where we were recording it. We came up with this like held cymbal at the end, and I couldn't quite at the time like grab the cymbal and carry on playing the groove. So he just stood like holding my cymbal, and on every beat four, he'd just go and catch it with his fingers. And it ended up with this play out thing, which we played live a lot. And I kind of managed to trying to play these beats live as often like, how is this even possible? Because it's layers, or but they've chosen a beat like a loop from back there, which was a mistake or something like that.
Yeah,
I catch the cymbal with my right hand and then play with intensity and all that. Was really something. But Magnificent, that kind of like, it's a funk groove, man. That's like, it's a proper like, it's a proper like James Gadsden type, Erwin on funky drummer. I put a couple of little open hi-hats because I played funky drummer so much in my life. Like with 2 grooves practicing, it was like, oh yeah, Reeves is on funky drummer again for the sound check. It's that groove, but we've got these tricky little like cymbal bells and stuff like that.
I was showing it off to some customers today because I was telling them I was going to be talking to you, and what amazes me about it is that it elevates the song without getting louder, without you changing really all that much. You add 3 bell hits to the existing groove. It's pretty phenomenal.
Oh, nice one. Well, I've got to say, Craig was mostly responsible for a little.
But just that idea of like you can elevate a song with very little.
Yeah, well, do you know what? One of my favourite bands as a kid was the Stone Roses. I listened to them right back then, and that was that. It was like, and especially, I was pretty disappointed to find out Fool's Gold is James Brown. In fact, a Bobby Bird loop, bongos and drums. But I was like, that's amazing. I want to know how to do that. But the groove that goes all the way through. Unfortunately, it wasn't. It wasn't ready. It was.
I didn't know that till right now.
Honestly, when I heard it, I was like, it was ripped off Bobby Bird. Can't remember the tune. It was from JB's Funky People, one of James Brown's Funky People records.
Right.
One of his drummers, probably Clive Stubblefield. Yeah, disappointing. But anyway, but at the time, I was like, the thing that changes all the way through that tune that keeps it interesting is the little, like the little conga, like I think it's conga, like a high quinto thing, line that goes all the way through, and the tambourine. Sorry, the drums and the tambourine are what the James Brown bit, and then the percussion stuff is Rennie.
Right, and that's probably why it changes.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't change very much. It doesn't. There's not much extra happens in that tune in terms of a drum part. I was also really into The Cure when I was a kid.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, and like the economy of those kind of like 80s and 90s drum beats that they had, all like, 16, 32, sometimes even longer loops, which were played. Just absolutely like mesmerizing in the fact that you'd get these little tiny changes over a long period of time that would just pull your ear. And as a drummer, like obviously as a kid, I was just listening to drums. I was hardly listening. It's just like drums. But that was, that was real education in like song, not just song playing, but like coming up with something that was not just bass drum on the 1 and the 3, snare drum on the 2 and the 4. All of those tunes that I mentioned, all of that Cure stuff from the middle, that they could have all have been that. But there's an extra thing here, there's another sound here. Wicked, amazing lesson. That
Do you know who Jason McGarr is?
Is he the Cure guy now?
The Death Cab for Cutie.
Okay, there's the drummer for the Cure is called Jason something like that.
Right. He's like that.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
He's super creative with very little.
Yeah.
It's like, it might be a 4-bar loop and all that changes is like bar 3, the kick pattern changes, and bar 4, he opens a hi-hat.
Yeah.
But it's enough to you be like, oh, wow, that's not just... He could have phoned that in. Like, he could have easily just phoned it in, but he doesn't.
Yeah. One of the you're talking about creative processes with the elbow. One of the creative processes that I've seen them use, and I know a lot of people, other people do as well, is they'll find a little bit of magic in 10 minutes of playing, and that will be the thing that's interesting. Do you know what? I worked with Tom Beck years ago as well.
Oh, right,
and, he did the same thing. I asked him about the way he made records, because the drums that I was playing live with him, he's a drummer. He's a wicked little drummer, actually. And he would press record, play the drums with a click for like 10 minutes. And then he'd just listen to it all, and he'd find one bar, like one single little bit. And he'd be like, that's the song. That 10 minutes that I did all of that one bar is it. And he was like, I've made whole songs out of mistakes, out of stuff that I accidentally hit this, or like, drop my stick. And that was the bar that kind of got used. And Elbow have done, I mean, that's not the same thing, but a lot of, in the songwriting process, they use the studio a lot, and they'll find the bits of stuff that are beautiful and magical without, interrupting the song.
There's a little hint of that on Kindling.
Yeah.
If you listen to the end of Kindling when they're talking,
the loop.
You're like, oh, we got that good then.
Yeah.
And there's like, they'll just hoover like this little 8 bars or something.
They were in a writing trip in Scotland, and I think they hardly did a thing. I shouldn't be saying that. And they, but they got that, and they were like, let's have. I think they did do a lot, actually. But one of them was like, the guitar player Pot had dropped a massive bag of kindling onto the floor, and it had hit in time, and they were like, oh, that's a good sound. Dun, dun, dun.
Is that what that is?
A massive bag of wood.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really hip. So like, they were obviously pretty established when you joined them. Was that a tough thing for you to sort of come into?
Yes, although I had done that stuff before, kind of step into someone else's shoes and try to be them to a certain extent. When I first joined Bat for Lashes, it was they were halfway through a tour. And
wow.
They had the unique voice of Chris Fatalero, who's, I mean, if you haven't heard of him, check him out. He's an amazing drummer.
Right.
Like, I think he went off to play with Brian Eno after. He's a
wow. Okay, yeah.
Force. He's and you're not just a drummer. He's all sorts. And the way he put that gig together was uniquely him. And I had to find a way of playing it and become him for a little bit before it became me. So and a few other things I had done it before, but I mean, obviously with a band as established as Elbow, there's I won't mention names, but I have heard drummers being replaced before and completely changing for the worse, in my opinion, the sound and the feeling of the band by just being different, by just being a different person. And obviously, you change the drums in a record and it changes a lot of the sound of it. It's like changing the singer, I think. So when I first joined, it was like I beat up. Like, apart from the new stuff, all the old stuff, I had multi tracks of all of the live gigs, and Danny Evans, the sound engineer, sent me all the stuff, so I had all the stems, so I could properly listen to things and properly like work out what it was, how to play it. And he was playing in a different way to me. He was playing very much on the back foot, he was hitting stuff hard, very simple, but everything was loops. Most things were loops. And Jup's blinded, man. He's an amazing drummer.
Yeah, it's
You know what?
yeah, it's just part of that band, isn't it? It's not going to be anything else.
You know, properly like a properly incredible sounding drummer. Really good. It's really good. Interesting. Comes up with wild ideas. Great time. Great feel. Great sound. All the stuff that you want in a band drum. And you know, to kind of step into that and change it would have been a terrible idea. I remember a guy saying, I was like, because I'd done his solo album and I'd been in with him for ages. And we started to become friends at that time. And I was like, what do you think? How should I do this? And he said, do the old stuff exactly like Jup and do the new stuff like you and us. And we'll figure out the forward. And so when you're playing songs as established as like One Day or Grounds for Divorce or any of that stuff, I've seldom seen Kid like Mirrorball as well. You know, those songs, it's not for you to change them. They're already there. They're already established. So I had to play at the right volume, the right feeling, behind the beat a little bit. I had tuned my drums in a certain way. You know, I worked hard on that. I worked for a lot.
I mean, you can hear it. You can hear it. Like, and the other thing I think that people forget about is that there's 20 years of a fan base don't really want to change it.
Of course they don't. I remember when the Stone Roses changed their drummer and it was just like, why? What's you know, I didn't like it.
Was that band called the Seahorses? Sorry. No, I'm joking. I'm joking.
Sorry, I missed the joke. Yes, very good. No, it was, you know, when Rennie left, it was just like, you know, the guy they got in was a session guy. I don't know who it was. But it sounded different. And that was, you know, what you realize is that it's like, you know, like Zeppelin not being able to replace, or saying for a long time that they weren't going to replace John Bonham. And then the only person they replaced him with was Jason Bonham, was the next Bonham.
It was the only choice, wasn't it?
Yeah, of course it was. You know, the guy literally seen and knew.
I mean, if you're going to put anybody on Ringo's chair, it's probably going to be Zach.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You know, that's probably. I mean, there'll be guys out there that can do it, but there's so much of the context that's missing. You know, so much of the personality of him as a person that would be missing, that Jason would be the only person to really know.
Well, it's also so much more than the music, isn't it? Like, you know, I think the Beatles is a really good example of that, because, and in fact, the Who is a really good example of that.
Yeah.
Sax, you know, like losing that person in a room as big as losing the musical voice. You know, I always think that once you get to a certain point in fact, probably not. I was going to say that, you know, you got to have lived a little bit to have your voice, but like, how old was Tony Williams when he was playing with, you know,
yeah, Miles.
What was that album? With 4 on it. Anyway.
7 Steps to Heaven and all that.
Yeah, you know, it's just like, listen, he's like 17 or something, unbelievably young. So obviously not. And Bonham, the same young. What was Ringo when he joined? He was the oldest one at like 22 or something.
Yeah, something crazy.
You know, the age thing. But you know, once you're in that kind of like scene and things, you have there's so much about what you are as a person and how you play your instrument and what all your choices have been up until that specific moment that will lead you to those records then to sound a certain way. Replace that. So I think replacing the drummers, it's massive. It's really big. It's like I still think that's not quite the same, but it's pretty massive.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the song Rock and Roll and you look at the song Keep a Knockin'.
It's the same.
Yeah, but it's also uniquely Bonham, isn't it? Because it's not Errol Palmer. It's not going to swing the same way, man. And it's, Little Richard didn't have 2x12 screaming at him and, you know, all that. So it's all of it.
You could call it progress.
Yes. Yeah, you could call it progress. Where are we? So I skipped a question, but I'm going to ask it. When I was talking about like how you accommodate artists' voices.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to ask, how do you take that to the stage if you've played with them live? Because I think personally, I think they are, and they probably should be separate processes.
Yeah, I suppose it is. I mean, in the studio, it depends what you're doing. There's a lot of times you get onto a studio and it'll be like, here's what you're playing. The session is 4 hours long session, in and out, read the music, listen to the music, do the demo, add a couple of things that are you, add a couple of things that's the reason that they called you as a drummer or a musician in there. You have a voice, so they called you in for that reason. That's it, and then you're gone. Whereas there's sometimes working with, over a longer period, like especially with Elbow, where, I'll sit, I usually get paid by the hour, sitting at the back of a studio, not doing anything for like 2 or 3 days sometimes is quite weird for me, or was quite weird for me when I first started working with Elbow. It was just, their creative process is like, let's just see what happens. We have songs. Let's take this bit. Let's use the studio. Let's do that. Let's do this. Won't need you for a little bit. Go and get a cup of tea. We all have one. But then, then working on it, then working on the live stuff. The live stuff is that the difference, I suppose, is the song is done. You know exactly what you're supposed to be doing. Recreating the record in whatever way the artist has the vision to. Whether it's just playing the songs as by rote, exactly as they are on the record, or whether it's something a bit more like have this stage show in mind. I went to saw Michael Kiwanuka last night.
Oh wow!
And it was like, it was a show. It wasn't a show like a musical theatre show. It was a show like that. Michael's an amazing musician, wonderful songwriter, and they just kind of seamlessly wound their set together, so it felt like I was in one. Felt like I was watching one long kind of artistic performance. And his records are kind of like that, but not like that. So there was I can imagine a lot of time spent in the rehearsal room just joining things together and making sure that the set flowed in a certain way and all that kind of stuff. And the preparation from musicians probably had to be pretty stellar on that. Yeah. Also, with Elbow, I'm going to say specifically, it's like nine albums to play on stage, and every single song has a different drum sound. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, you could go down
drums,
all kinds of rabbit holes, couldn't you?
Electronics, that's what we did with Bat for Lashes. Had the smallest acoustic kit setup, had snare drum, floor tom, bass drum, hi hats, and cymbal. That was it. Everything else had like 3 pads in front of me, triggers, double triggers on everything apart from bass drum trigger. A left foot pedal, and a laptop where Ableton was like changing the sounds through, verses to choruses. Like this sound was different here. Sometimes beat to beat had one part going and each trigger was like, that one, then that one, then that one, written in Ableton.
That's bonkers.
That was Chris Vattalera's idea. Thanks, Chris. Really hard. But yeah, that was that approach. But with Elbow, I don't play any electronics in there. How about this? Let's put a tea towel over the floor tom for this snare drum for that snare drum's off, this tambourine for that song, this tambourine for that song, this shaker for this one, this shaker for another one. Danny Evans, the sound engineer out the front, manipulating the sound so that it's true to the spirit and the record. And so you go into rehearsal to do a new song, and at the beginning, obviously, they were all new. And Danny was coming up to me and like, "Can you not rim shot the snare drum? Just makes it all thin and weedy sounding. Can you tune it lower? We want more dampening on that. We had the last one at 150 hertz. Can you tune it down? Yours is at 165. Super nerdy stuff. Yeah. So there's like each instrument and each thing on each song is like to be, worked on and manipulated so that it sounds right, so that it sounds like the audience want it to sound. It's vibey and it's being played, and it's not prescriptive, but it's right. So, yeah.
Wow, man, that's like
mental, mate.
There's like so many things off of that. Like, who even teaches kids now that that's a thing that they're going to have to deal with?
Yeah, you just kind of like, at some point someone will ask you to do it differently, and that's how you learn, right?
Well, totally, but it's like it's the removal of the ego.
Yeah, yeah.
It's understanding that you're there as a vehicle.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know,
You're a conduit to the music, and that's an interesting like approach. I've got these. I'm going to show you. Hang on.
okay.
A friend of mine, Pete Jobson, actually, who plays with I played with I Am Clute and was doing.
Oh yeah.
I met his we met guy's solo record. And he's become a mate. I did his record in here, and he was like, every time he came along, he brought me a present. It was one. And he brought me this like one of those Zildjian spiral stacker things.
Oh yeah. Totally. I can see Alex has got over his right shoulder. He has some crazy Zildjian setup.
He goes, yeah, I saw this and I thought he bought me the Oblique Strategies. Well, it was his own. Is that in mirror image?
Yeah, I can see it. I don't know what it is.
Okay, so the Oblique Strategies, Brian Eno's producer cards. It's Ryan Eno and Peter Schmidt, who were working together, I think, on a Bowie record.
Wow.
70s. And they were like, what we need sometimes is like a random thought to change the mindset of what's going on. We're stuck in a rut here. Something's happening. And so what I started doing with these things is like every day, if I was working in an artistic way, rather than just like, I needed to get something done, it's like, let's make it interesting instead. I'm going to pick one at random.
Okay. So guys, if you're listening to this, imagine a box of cards like Cards from Cards of Humanity, but
except less awful.
So what have we got?
So the one picked at random says, faced with a choice, do both. I think, in relevance to what you were saying, like in terms of like reduce, like backing off your ego. Egos, I think, is important in music. So let's
agreed.
Yeah, and I think ego is often what leads to artistic uniqueness and merit and those kind of things. It's often about self and self-explanation and the expression of self and wanting to be. That kind of is ego, isn't it?
None of us would be musicians without it.
Yeah, exactly. But as essentially a sideman, which is kind of what my job is. I'm not the person who comes up with the original idea often. But I'm there to serve. I'm there to serve what it is, whether it's like something that it does need to be chopsy and like, if I'm in a club, if I'm in Ronnie Scott's, actually playing a players gig and I can just like do a thing, whatever I want, then fine. It kind of, you're in the moment. But if you're playing and the song is this and it has to be that and everyone's expecting that in a band specifically, then you do have to kind of like back off it a little bit. So the 4 that I've got up and from the last few days of me, I didn't want to put any of them away. The first one that came out was question the heroic approach, which made me think of like, when I go out and I want to put a few extra fills in that aren't actually necessary, that is just like, you got to just think about whether everyone else wants what you're doing. The heroic approach.
Beautiful.
But then literally right next to it, I've also, the next one that came out the next day was don't be frightened to display your talents. Yeah. Where do you land in between that? How is that possible to reconcile those two things?
I have no idea.
Philosophy,
no idea.
Music, man. It's like you don't. I mean, once you've opened the book, it's impossible to close. It's a Pandora's box of philosophical thought.
I mean, principally, it's absolutely amazing. Like the whole idea is tremendous to me. I think though, I'm like you. I would have like 5 and be like, well, now I've got a problem deciding which one to use, and
yeah.
The rut is not the writing; it's picking a bloody card.
They're pretty amazing. I mean, they're only designed to kind of like change someone's. When you're in a moment, everyone's arguing, or like
it's just a little poke. Yeah,
which happens in a studio. In Snap Studios around the corner from me, they've got this lovely Neve desk and a nice, nice sounding room, beautiful selection of mics, and then they've got on the on the top of the Neve, they've got this knob, and it says it's like it's from 0 to 11, and it's called the blame shifter. It's like, who got this?
Brilliant. Well, we're a drum store, so it would be kind of remiss of me to do an interview like this and not talk about gear. So, you seem like a big Sonar guy.
Yeah, I love their drums.
That's what I play too. I play the same kit as you. I play the vintage series.
It's a wonderful kit, isn't it?
Sensational.
Oh, also
Sensational.
versatile as anything. In fact, they just sent me this. Well, maybe I can. You're going to use the video for this.
Yeah, we will use the video. Yeah.
For those who are on analog, they sent me the 20-inch.
The vintage in 12, 14.
I've got loads of these kits now.
They are so good.
That's the 20 and 12. Hang on, 12, 14. And I've got an 18 in the studio at the moment. I put an really old 60s Ludwig head that I had off one of my old kits on it, and it sounds really something.
It's the 20 I play, and I keep thinking I want new drums, right? And I play something, and then I'll play my Sonar, like nope. There's nothing comes close to it yet. I haven't found a kit that rivals the tone yet.
Yeah, they're pretty special, and also they're really versatile. Like, I can make it sound old, and I can make it sound like brand spanking modern as well. But it retains a bit. I think retains a bit of character. So like, on this kit, I put on the bass drum. I put on like old sounding heads, so it goes boom boom. You know, it's got a bit of jazz vibe to it, funk and jazz vibe to this specific one. But on the toms, I've got some Response 2 heads, the aquarium ones, which are like double thickness heads. I think they're really special actually, and it gives it a real mod. You know, like dampen it. On my kit that's in my car right now is another Sonar vintage one. I've got like the texture coated thin heads, and I've got it tuned a bit more like boing boing.
Yeah.
Say I've got two 12-inch toms, one for here and one for the just like different drums, completely different.
Yeah, there's like this middle in the tone that I can't find in any other wood apart from beech. It's like maple's a bit brighter, you can hear the high end, and birch is a bit darker, but there's this warmth and openness in the beech. It's just like fucking hell.
Yeah, it's really great. And the snare, those snare drums, one there. That's an old 20s single Slingle and Radio King. That one on acrylite. That one's the Sonar vintage series. Yeah. And I've got a highlight there, the son of my hand.
Okay, I remember watching one of your shootout videos.
Oh, the one.
Yeah, and one of them's like one of the Ascent steel things.
Oh yeah, that's incredible. That thing.
What?
Yeah, no.
Just like this shouldn't be this good.
Yeah, I was really messing around with it. I did just before I did that snare drum video. This was right in the middle of lockdown, I think. I was like, I've lost 50% of my work. So I started doing stuff like I was doing loads of studio stuff. It was fine, good for that. But I didn't go on tour. I have to sit in a tour, but I have to. Like it's a bad thing. I didn't have to sit around in a tour whinging about drinking too much beer and staying up late playing rock and roll gigs. God, what a life, eh? No, so I wasn't away, so I'd spend my time like changing snare drum heads, like really stuff that my wife was not interested in. And I did like a tech 2 days where I got all my snare drums and I just changed the heads and tried to find the right one for each drum, tuned it in a certain way, try to find its little sweet spot, which I you kind of know your snare drums, but I got to know them better than ever. And that snare drum, the Sonar Ascent, I think I ended up putting a dot, power dot, texture coated with power dot on it. Yeah. Tuning it low. I think I tuned it low, so it had a bit of bite to it. Deep metal snare drums tuned low with a bit of damping on, like sound great recorded, or often sound great recorded. That one sounded wonderful. Steel snare drum. Really.
Just all day long. Do you? Obviously, you do because you have some. But do you really buy into the vintage drum thing? And I don't mean Sonar vintage, I mean old drums.
Yeah, oh yeah, totally. I've got loads of old stuff because each one has got its own character and vibe. Everything sounds different. So I don't think there's anything that sounds as good to me. Where is it? It's a home. I've got a 1920s nickel over brass Ludwig Universal, the
Wow.
model, which is basically it's the same shell as the old Black Beauty, which everyone wants, but it's about 1/10 the price.
And 100 years old.
Literally 100 years old. I remember I bought these from the US in lockdown. I bought the Acrolite, which I was just showing you, which I hadn't got. I've got a couple of 400s, old Ludwig 400s from the 60s, the deep one, and I've got the shallow one. And I really like those, but the Acrolite was 150 quid from America. I was like, I can't not get this from this, and I haven't. But that was just because it was from the same store as the one I'd been looking for, this nickel over brass snare drum for ages and ages, and I hadn't found one in the UK. So I started looking in the US, and when it came through, I unpackaged it and paid it, and I was like, "This is the sound of." It doesn't sound like anything else.
Yeah,
and it doesn't record it. It doesn't not right for everything. If I could, I'd use it for almost everything. That Sonar Vintage would cover most of my sessions, I think. But yeah, it's got a certain thing to it that I haven't heard any other drum, modern, old, ever have. It's just wonderful. So that's the kind of thing I'm after in vintage drums. That and like, I've got the old Salvation Army marching drum, which just calfskin heads. Just sounds like it sounds. It's never going to sound.
Do you think it's these drums have that thing because of things like their age? I know, was it the guy that used to build drums for Yamaha, the guy called Hagi, used to say that it takes about 25 years for a kit to mature?
Wow, really?
I remember reading that somewhere. So do you think that's a thing, like that drum's had 100 years of fucking shit and grime and sweat and stick head stuff in it,
Totally. That's why, a lot of bass players don't want to change the strings.
Mm-hmm.
Big crap all over them. They're a certain way. And as soon as you put new strings on it, the whole tone of everything changes for them. That's why I know a lot of bass players use flat wound strings to kind of give the duller, older kind of sound. But yeah, I think drums are the same thing. I mean, I'd be really interested to hear these Sonar Vintage kits in 25 years. Because who knows, they'll be the classic kits of that time. They're expensive, they're beautifully made. Expensive, like expensively made. They're, no expense spared kind of thing. Top range stuff. And I think they'll last forever. I think they'll sound incredible.
Yeah, agreed. But the fascinating thing about it all is when I was at college studying, one of the lecturers was like, you realise that the guys that we all look up to, as a drummer, your Tony Williams, your Art Blakey and all these guys, they were using the best gear they could get their hands on.
Yeah.
They weren't using snare drums that were 30 years old, obviously because they weren't around, and they didn't have availability, but they wanted it to be super hip and super new.
Yeah, totally.
It's a really weird thing, the obsession with vintage gear.
But maybe, the drum kit wasn't that old back then, was it? It hadn't.
No.
Even the setup of itself. What was that? Gene Krupa was probably one of the first guys to like popularize that kind of, that kind of sound. Yeah. Maybe
40s.
Yeah, exactly. It was happening, but the hi-hat had only just been invented, so there wasn't that much of that around that was 40 years old. So perhaps in the 50s and 60s, looking back, it was just stuff that wasn't made properly. Like the hardware of those kits was probably awful. Like see guys now using like modern hardware, old drums. I think that's a really interesting way of going because you don't get stuff falling over.
Well, I had a 400 from the 70s.
Oh yeah,
and the throw-off wouldn't hold the wires in place.
Right.
And it was before Ludwig brought out the sort of replacement throw-off. So
the PA.
It's like, this drum's unusable because like 3 tunes into a wedding, I've got a timbali instead of a snare drum.
Exactly.
But then
cymbals, the same thing. So like if you buy, you can kind of date like old Zildjian cymbals, logo, and then logo, which is like 70s, and then there's the stuff slightly before, and then the stamp supposed to tell you exactly when it was made. Those cymbals gradually got a little bit thicker because drummers were starting to hit harder. Up until the point where, like now, drummers don't necessarily have to really smash drums as hard because PAs have got great, monitoring's got great. You don't necessarily have to whack stuff, but for a little bit, like you got those Zildjian projection crashes or like thick stage cymbals, which were just made solely to get over the guitar player's noise. There was no competing. You just had to like have big sticks and bring your arms up in the air and hit the drums as hard as you possibly could. So drums had to be met, and cymbals had to be made so that they weren't just going to die under the pressure of that.
Yeah. So as someone who records then with cymbals like that, what are you looking for?
Well, I think, do you know what? I think my tastes keep changing all the time. I've started to go for slightly older, slightly brighter cymbals. So
Right.
my favorite set at the moment, and I mean at the moment, like this last couple of months, is I found a 60 set of Avidis 14-inch hi-hats, an old 18-inch Crash, and a 20-inch Crash Ride, all Zildjian, all old. And it's just like, that's what's floating my boat right now. They're all quite bright, they're quite thin, but they haven't got that K darkness, they haven't got the Constantinople kind of like thing. But to be honest, I change it constantly. And and like, yeah, I've got loads of cymbals. I just kept collecting stuff. I've got a bag of cymbals which has got a sign on it that says broken stuff. And it's stuff that I found in rehearsal rooms. And I've been like, can I give you a tenner? And they'll be like, yeah, fine. Yeah, just take it. It's a bag of shit. And, you know, a cymbal with like a bit missing or like a crack down there that just sounds mad. Yeah. And for certain things I love. Like, yeah, a couple of days ago, I was using my set of hi-hats was a broken 16-inch Minor Crash with a chain in it that someone literally put, like, stapled in there somehow, and then an upside down china that I found in it's completely broken, and it just sounded amazing for them.
Holy shit.
I mean, for most stuff, it would have sounded like a bag of shit. But for that tune, I remember.
I mean, that's the lesson, isn't it? There's a sound in everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's an old vase up here. Hang on.
I've seen this lately on your Instagram.
Yeah. I found the shop. Hey, do you know what? Advice to young drummers: go to a charity shop and hit stuff. Sometimes that as an old cow drum here as well, which is like an old, I don't know, some kind of like metal container that someone's put calfskin heads on and lapped it, and it sounds bonkers.
Amazing.
And I've used it for all sorts of stuff.
Wicked. Okay, we'll round it out with a really sort of game show question. But your recording career, what 3 things have you learned that's influenced you more than anything else?
Oh my God, I wish you prepared me for this one.
Sorry. But then I wouldn't have the look in your eyes of like...
No, fair enough. Yeah. 3 things. So can you repeat the question?
So what 3 things over your recording career have you learned that's influenced you the most?
I think hearing yourself back recorded is the biggest thing of all. So iPhone recording, because, or proper recording or anything like that, because as soon as you hear your voice, for instance, your spoken voice on tape for the first time in your life, you're like, do I really sound like that? Because inside your own, the way the acoustics work in your head, because when you're speaking, because you're in your head, you sound much bassier than you actually are. You're getting the resonance of that, and then suddenly you hear it, and everything sounds like a speaker. Like it's completely different. And I think it's the same with drums. Like suddenly you realize that certainly when you're young, the hi-hats are too loud, the crash cymbals too loud, whatever you're hitting. That if you're right-handed and you're leading with your right hand, that hand is dominating this, but you're relying on it to keep time.
Yeah.
Kind of the bass drum, snare drum sounds woolly or it sounds indistinct, all those kind of things. But mainly your time sounds bad. Yeah. Like I think I'm probably playing beats that I was still like playing beats that I was in year 2 of my drumming when I first started drumming, but just now they sound good. Yeah. Another thing, I saw Matt Chamberlain on. I was stalking Matt Chamberlain for a little bit because I love his playing.
Amazing.
I think he's just one. I think he's the best. I think he's the best drummer in the world. I'm going to say that. I think he's the best drummer in the world because he's just incredible. He has a voice. He has chops. He has one of the best sounds. But what I learned from him is the best drummers, especially recorded drummers, will sound like a record immediately. They sit down behind the kit with their sound, the way they hit the drums, their tuning of their kit, and it sounds like a finished record. That's like, and getting to that point is decades, certainly a long time, especially if you're a session player of whatever kind. because you get asked to do so many different types of things, different styles, different sounds, different approaches. Can you make it sound a bit more like, and someone will reference a record that you've hopefully heard. It's just, you know, and you're constantly being challenged in the studio, but back in the can, you're playing, and that's great. That second verse, can you just push it into the chorus a little bit more? And that second beat you're playing, I like the first beat that you played on the couple of takes ago, but can you play that one, but on the ride cymbal? And then on the play out, can we just have a few more fills, and can you just kind of go for it a bit more? Oh, and yeah, it stops on okay, ready? Space bar. You know, that's all, like, as a session guy, you're on the other side of the glass of someone paying £1,000 a day for a studio. And if you haven't written this down, or you haven't got an amazing memory, you're kind of screwed, you know, and especially if you're playing live with a band. That's the stuff, like little things, producer questions. I didn't know that fill. No, you didn't listen to me. Can you do that fill like you did it a couple of takes ago? Do you remember? And if you weren't listening to yourself, you weren't in the moment, you don't remember. Can you play it back to me? Oh yeah, that fill. Okay, go. You know, like there's your day.
Wow.
Thinking quickly and thinking on your feet, and giving the person what they want and what they need is like moment to moment. And no one is giving you any more anyway, and unless you're like Ralph Sums or Neil Wilkinson or Thomas. I know those guys will do like big band charts, and they'll get like, you know, orchestra sessions and stuff like that, film sessions, massive ones, and those kinds of things. I don't really do like reading gigs like that, because I can't read nearly well enough to do that kind of stuff where they're just like dots, go. Most of the time, the sessions that I do, it will be, you know, someone might have like played you the demo like 5 minutes before, and that's the time you've heard the song, and you like sitting there writing notes or remembering it, whichever way you roadmap a song, and then you're in. Like, okay, let's get a sound. Snare drum sounds good. Yeah, tom sounds good. All right, 1, 2. So, you know, like that's the thinking on your feet, thinking quickly.
Wow.
That doesn't really answer your question. I can't remember. I've gone off on one, so.
No, it's like, yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff wrapped up in that, but it's a skill set that you have to learn.
Yeah.
That I think your career will have taught you.
I got another one, third one.
Okay.
Answer your question, which I think is good advice to like someone starting out, younger players, which is when you practice with meaning. If you just no reason, there is merit to a little bit of that, but when what you practice is what you play on a gig. So if you're practicing solos all the time and you get to a gig and your timing's sloppy, it's because you haven't been practicing your time. You know, like whatever type of music that you're playing, if you're playing blast beats, you need to be in time. You need to be, you know, sound good. If you're just playing blast beats, but you're doing fills all over the place, people are like, what's he doing? But so practice what you're going to play, and practice with meaning. Don't practice in front of, don't always practice in front of the telly. Don't practice in front of Instagram, doom scrolling while you're practicing your left hand. You know, like practice with meaning.
Beautiful. Well, what's next, man, for you?
It's different every day. Next week, I'm playing at Buckingham Palace.
Oh, wow, shit.
Yeah, we're doing with Elbow. So we're doing the Buckingham Palace concert for the Queen's Jubilee. Mm-hmm. The night before, I've got a concert. Do you know Red Rooster Festival in Suffolk or Norfolk?
No.
C6 Steve is headlining, and I'm playing with a guy called Marcus Bonfanti, who I've known loved for a long time. He's a good friend and a great musician. I've got a set with him at that festival on the Friday. And then the week after that, we're going into rehearsals with Elbow. We've got some festivals over the summer, starting with a couple of ones at Hampton Court Palace, and then we've got Glastonbury. We're playing Pyramid Stage on the Sunday.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, so one of the headline slots, it's just the best place to play ever. It really is. It's really something. And I got just loads of studio things going.
Good. Well, man, I really appreciate you taking an hour to talk all things drums, man. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was a great chat. So
yeah, thanks for inviting me on. Really appreciate it.
No worries. If you're ever in Glasgow or Leeds, we have 2 branches, so come in and say hi, and we'll talk.
Yeah, I'd love to see you and see the shop.
Yeah. Talk more shit and drink coffee and
Wonderful. Love it.
all that. But take care, man. I hope the gigs and all that go well. And
Nice one.
no doubt we'll see you down the road.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Take care, man. See ya.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Drummers Only podcast. Please leave us a review and make sure you subscribe. If you need any more information about us or any gear mentioned, head on over to drummersonly.co.uk and make sure you follow us on all of our social channels at drummersonlyuk. Thanks for listening. Peace.